Welcome to THINKpod. My name is Francisco.
And I'm Aziz, and at ThinkPod, we speak about the smartest ideas and the biggest challenges facing the world right now. We speak about where we are, how we got here, and where we're going.
In this episode of ThinkPod, our guest is Dr. Jennifer Holmgren, CEO of Lanza Tech. We discuss exciting developments in carbon capture technology, and we look at whether there is enough carbon above ground to create a new circular carbon economy, and if the technology is ready for mass adoption.
So Dr.
Don't call me doc.
Yeah, all right. So Jennifer, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank
We would like to know more about your work at Lanza Tech. We're going to start with that and we're going to move forward from there.
So what Lanza Tech does is it recycles carbon. We take waste emissions, either gaseous waste, like from steel mills or refineries, or solid waste, like municipal solid waste, and we convert them to ethanol. Then we take that ethanol and we turn it into the products you use in your daily lives. We turn it into polyester, into detergent, but we've also turned it into sustainable aviation fuel. So basically, we believe that there's enough carbon above ground to create a new carbon economy that allows us to keep carbon from the air.
Is this technology ready for mass adoption?
It is. We have already built our first commercial plant. It is operating in China. Our second one is also operating in China. The first one at a steel mill for a few years, and the second one came up earlier this year, and it's operating at a ferroalloy plant. If you don't mind, I'll take one step back and say, already we've made fabric from that ethanol for Lululemon. We've already made detergent for Unilever. We've already flown a Virgin Atlantic flight across the ocean. And we have also made floor cleaner for a Swiss company, Mebel. And I need for you to just take one moment and let that blow you away, right? Something that was going to be pollution at a steel mill ended up being something that you can use. That's a circular economy.
You seem very passionate about the topic, so we want to understand how you got into this field and what got you interested at first and where you are right now.
I've been in the process industry for 30 years, and I started actually with a passion for energy democracy. Not everybody in the world has access to just power. And then I realized that power wasn't enough, that we needed to provide clean power. I started thinking about climate change. So I started working on making biofuels and sustainable aviation fuel. And I started to realize very quickly there's just not enough feedstock. And so what that means is, the world uses 100 million barrels a day of petroleum equivalents, right? How are you going to get there from here with biological feedstocks? And so I got introduced to this company, Lanza Tech, by its founder, and I realized that if we could convert all these waste resources, finally we would be at a point that we could scale to the level of today's petrochemical industry.
What business opportunity do you see in the climate crisis?
The climate crisis, unfortunately, it's a monster business opportunity, or at least you have to think of it that way if we want to solve it. We need so many things to go well and to scale to be successful. And so direct air capture, for example, we have to scale direct air capture. We have to scale technologies like ours that can convert carbon. We have to really massively scale power. If you stop and think about it, we are not on a trajectory to just displace today's power production. We need to be on a trajectory where we use power to make stuff, where we use power to make hydrogen, to convert CO2 to everything. So the amount of power we have to install is orders of magnitude more than the power we currently use today. That's a business opportunity. All of that is a business opportunity.
Do you believe there's an ethical challenge in viewing the climate crisis as a business opportunity?
You know what? Yes. And I wish we lived in a world where social equity and environmental equity were what drove everybody. Unfortunately, it's not what drives people. And we either adapt to what drives the world today and come up with solutions, or we sit around and wait for the world to change its position on how it's going to solve this problem. I don't think waiting is a solution. If we can transition to a just economy, that's all the better, but we don't have time to spend waiting for the perfect. The perfect is the enemy of the good. The perfect is actually a call to inaction. We just need to move.
What engagement from government is there in developing this technology?
Well, actually, governments have been hugely important in this. I know that a lot of people talk about how industry has had to lead this transition. But to be frank, we have received a tremendous amount of support across the world from governments. In the United States, the U.S. Department of Energy is helping us scale our technologies. In Europe and in the UK, in both of those cases, we're building sustainable aviation fuel plants with the support of the government. So one of the things that's become really important is if you think about building the first of a kind plants, you start with small scale work that you do in the lab. You can get funding for that, okay? Both from governments and VCs. Then you've got to get to scale, the first commercial unit. To do that, you've got to put a lot of steel in the ground, pilot plants, demonstration plants, and the first of a kind. Those are so hard to finance. In fact, in our industry, we call that crossing the valley of death. And what we have noticed now is that governments are putting more and more funding in helping companies across that valley of death. And that is really exciting. That will really help things go faster.
So you talked about how governments are making that valley a bit shorter than it has to be. You know, that early stage start where people are starting off and they're trying to get that initial capital and surviving to scale. Do you think the capital providers and investors are also being as passionate, especially with recycling and carbon neutral central technology?
I do. If you look at what the Breakthrough Catalyst Group is doing, right, with Bill Gates leading that, they're working with governments to help fund first of a kind by helping pay for the green premium, right? The first ones are always more expensive. And so they've actually stepped up and said, they've got a Breakthrough Ventures and now Breakthrough Catalyst, right? One funds early work and the other one will help you scale and be able to deliver at commercial. I'm seeing more and more investors try to create the ecosystem that will help us accelerate getting to scale.
What is the ideal relationship you'd like to see between government and business?
I don't know that there's an ideal relationship, right? Every country deals with the business sector differently. Look at how China deals with the business sector versus the US. So as with everything right now, it's not a one-size-fits-all. We need every approach, every solution, but what we do need is to make sure that government is only laying down technology-neutral legislation. It's got to be outcome-based, not approach-based, because what that does is it leaves all of the new approaches that nobody thought of out in the wings, and they can't contribute fast enough. I think that's a thesis that must be foundational across the world.
Do you see a good model currently implemented by a certain country that would fall into that category?
You know what? It's hard for me to say. We work in India, where the government is very supportive. In China, again, where the government is supportive. US and Europe, I've already mentioned. I'm seeing more and more in Canada. No, I think governments are all coming around. I think the gap is not in the local support, but in the standardization across country, in the commitments across countries. That is lagging behind. And I think that will hurt us, right? You have the COP discussions and we're still debating, you know? We have an emergency and we're still trying to figure out how we're gonna get out. And that is actually more important than we think. If I develop a fuel, a sustainable aviation fuel that qualifies in your country but not in yours, I'm gonna have a hard time developing something that I can trade globally. And that will slow you down. And even though regional solutions are really important in this new energy transition, we still need to have supply chains that work. And they don't work if different people have different standards.
You mentioned sustainable aviation fuel. How does this compare to other alternatives, say for example, hydrogen, or even I've seen Elon Musk try to proposition electric planes. I don't think that's possible, but I'd be curious to see your perspective.
So first of all, if you talk about sustainable aviation fuels, they'll drop in solutions, right? And so what that means is you don't have to change infrastructure. And more importantly, what it also means is you can fly a plane from a location that has a lot of it to a location that has none of it and be able to get back because you're using the same infrastructure and you could put whatever is available. Having said that, I believe electric aviation actually will become quite important.
But the energy density of batteries is like 40 times lower than most fuels.
Yeah, but I am not proposing that we fly an electric plane across the ocean,
okay.
right? And actually, this is where regional solutions are going to be fantastic, and electric aviation will have a role in regional solutions. I think that one of the most important things in making the energy transition happening is we've got to change this mentality that centralized is better, bigger is better, and that one solution has to fit everything. We're going to have to shift paradigms completely. To create the new economy, we have to shift. And what that means is, I'm so glad you asked me that question. What that means is we have to stop measuring new approaches and new solutions, right, to the old approaches and new solutions. And you were already thinking ahead. You'd already decided, okay, right? But not everybody sees what you see. And we need to create an economy that's different, an economy that's fit for purpose. Look at what's happening with supply chains right now. What a disaster, right? Well, the new world will be distributed. We won't have this problem.
So, Jennifer, you talk about paradigm shifts, right? You talk about having new approaches to solve the old problems as well as new problems. But at the same time, you're very passionate about speed. We were talking earlier, and you're talking about speed, and we have to be fast. How can we reconcile convincing people in the world to shift paradigms, but do it at a very fast speed?
You don't convince people to shift paradigms. You just shift paradigms and they'll come along. I mean, it's a tough transition. You just have to show it. But I would tell you that already this distributed approach, of course, it's mobile phones. We've already quietly started to transition to this distributed world. The process industry needs to catch up.
You mentioned before profit is a key motivator. What's the price difference of the fuels that you're developing compared to traditional, say, virgin fuels?
It's very tough to compete in a first of a kind or even a second with industries that have been around for 100 years. So the price of our sustainable aviation fuel depends very much on the feedstock, the ethanol that we use, and what resource we use to make it. But we're not at parity, and we won't be for a long time. We will get there. But today, you could easily pay 50, 60% or even more premium.
What you're asking for is patience and allowing you to work in that domain. Where do you see that lack of patience perhaps, exhibiting the most? Is it through other businesses that are competing with you? Is it through governments? Is it through the people, the consumers who are not really eager to adopt more sustainable solutions? Is it a combination of all of that?
That's a really great question. And I thought you were headed in another way, because I thought you would say, wait, you're telling us we need to be patient, but we don't have time. We have a mismatch in systems when it comes to the process industry. So venture funds were set up to be 10 years. Okay, now there's some new ones, including Breakthrough Energy, that is 20 years. But you're already trying to force fit an approach that goes for very short-term goals and gains to something that requires a long time. So I would say we need to change everything. And the resistance is with everything. But I'll give you an example. So all you have to do is get to the yes, right? You know it, you're both entrepreneurs, right? You're gonna kiss a lot of frogs. You're gonna get, right? You're gonna get 100 no's, you're gonna get one yes. But you get the yes, and then you go to the next one, and then you go to the next one. And I always like to tell people, for all the ones that tell you no, or the people that are trying to tell you there's a better way, you do the penguins in Madagascar, you just smile and wave, you just keep moving. And every pocket has resistance. We did LanzaTech, we formed LanzaTech in a very special way. So in the pharmaceutical industry or in some other industries, you've got to go through all of these approval processes, right? You don't raise cash for a stage. You meet your KPIs and then you release cash for the next stage, right? That's also how LPs work, limited partners, right? In venture funds. But it's not how the process industry works. You build your pilot and then you've got to go raise cash so that you can build your demo. Then you demonstrate your KPIs, you go raise cash again with different investors. What we did is we said, hey guys, if you come in to LanzaTech, we want you not just to invest in the demo, we want you to commit to the next stage. And if we can show you we meet the KPIs, we will continue to go together next scale. Take money out of the system. And the first one that does that, we did a prepaid offtake agreement. You know, everybody wants to give you an offtake agreement. What am I going to do with an offtake agreement? I can't build anything. I have to just go to somebody to give me money, and they'll still say, well, that's the first one. I'm not going to invest in the first one. We got an agreement with Air Nippon, ANA, and they gave us a prepaid offtake agreement. And we now have another one in the works. And that helps us actually build stuff. And I just talked to somebody who told me they'd heard about this, and they just got a prepaid offtake agreement as well. So it's a revolution, and in a revolution, you do it one at a time.
So you talk about governments should be leading, you talk about corporations should be leading, you appreciate the fact that billionaires and business leaders are leading. One other element or another segment of population that we promote to lead is the youth, right?
God,
that you
yeah.
inspire by your work. A lot of youth are very passionate about this because it's going to impact their life in the future. What message do you have for the youth? And how can they lead? A young person who's looking up to the work that you're doing, who's looking up to the world and seeing what's happening. How can they lead the change?
So first of all, a big shout out to the youth. You know, the progress that we've seen over the past few years, I guarantee you that without Fridays for Future and all of these youth-led movements, it would not have happened. I can guarantee you that the urgency, I would say shaming of us, you know, that's good. I mean, it's good. You have to hold people accountable, and the youth have done a great job in doing that. But the youth can do anything and everything, right? They're going to be the world leaders. You know, you look at some of the politicians we have now, they're young. They're young for what would be a standard. They're already leading, and they've prepared themselves to lead by leading when they were 14 and 16, right? They do technology, they study technology to be part of technology solutions. What I would say is just remember that the future is not going to be enabled by people who do technology. It's going to be enabled by the people to bring visibility like you guys, the journalists, the storytellers, the government. Everybody's going to have to help with this transition. So if you're young, don't feel like you have to do one thing. You can be anything and contribute to this. That's my view. But do something. Don't do nothing. Nothing will kill us.
We're going to close on one final question. It's a big question as well. What personal legacy do you want to leave behind for the future generation?
I want to show that individual action matters, that passion matters. And frankly, I want to show that a woman can do all sorts of things and be a role model in that way.
Amen.
Well, Professor, Doctor, we thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you here.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We would love you to let others know about this podcast.
So please rate us, leave us a comment, and share with someone who might enjoy it too.
And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on our next episode.